Hey y'all, today I am sharing 4 crockpot recipes, and the first one I made was this crockpot ham and cheese. I got this idea a while back off of like an old viral Facebook post, and it was pretty vague, and I could not find anything else on the internet about it, so I just kind of ran with it and did my own thing. So I did go out and purchase this mini crockpot that I've been wanting for a while. It was just like 10 bucks at Walmart, and I knew it would be perfect for like dips and stuff. And of course stuff like this. So I have a 1-pound block of velveeta cheese, just the smaller box, a 5-ounce can of evaporated milk, and 1 pound of some shaved ham from the deli. The original post called for like 6 pounds of ham, which I'm assuming was probably for a party, but obviously I cut this way down, and 1 pound is more than enough for my size family. So I did start by spraying down the crock pot with some nonstick cooking spray. I added the full pound of velveeta cheese, and I did cube it up beforehand. I added in the full can of milk, and of course I just dumped that ham in on top. And I'm just going in there with my clean hands and kind of breaking it apart just so that it could fit in there better and so that lid could go on like securely. But you got to remember that, you know, the cheese is going to melt down, so it's going to fit, it's going to be fine. So I did turn it down on low, and I was not sure how long to cook this, but I just kind of based it off of like other recipes that I've used in the crock pot using velveeta cheese. So since this was the first time using this crock pot, I decided to go in at the 1 hour mark, which is right here, to see how it was doing, and it was about halfway melted down. So covered it back up and let it go for another hour, and that was perfect. So 2 hours did the trick for this recipe in this particular crock pot. I did make sure to stir it really well to get that milk really incorporated with the cheese. As you can see, it looks really soupy and messy at this point, and don't get me wrong, it is going to be a little messy, of course, but as soon as you turn off that crock pot, and especially once you start serving it on the buns and it just slightly cools, it's going to thicken a lot. I was really excited about this recipe because we love hot ham and cheeses, and we always have to serve ours with like barbecue chips, and then I just threw some apples on the side. But this was really good. It was just super rich, as you can imagine, but it's definitely worth playing around with. I think if I cut the amount of cheese down, it'd be perfect. Up next, I made vegetable soup, which is one of my absolute favorite meals. This does have meat in it, so I guess it's technically a vegetable beef soup, but that's just what we've always called it, vegetable soup, so that's why I say that. And this is definitely on the thicker side, so I guess technically it's like a vegetable stew. But I will explain here in a little bit what happened there. So I did pull out my Kasori cooker for this. The company sent me this a few years back, and I honestly forgot about it here in the last little bit because I've had it stored in my pantry and it got covered up with some bags, but I just wanted to pull it out because it has a saute function on it, so I figured, you know, one less dish wouldn't hurt. So I am going to cook up 1 pound of ground beef. You could totally double this if you wanted it to be more meaty, but I find that 1 pound is perfect for us, and plus my kids do tend to prefer like less meat in certain things, so that's my reasoning. But like I say in almost every video, when I'm cooking ground beef, about halfway through, I like to go in and season it, and I pretty much always do it the same. So just some salt, pepper, onion, and garlic powder. Of course, if you like actual onion, you could dice one up and cook that in with the beef versus using the powder. So just do whatever you prefer, whatever your family's comfortable with. But once that was fully cooked, I drained off the grease, and then I added in 2 russet potatoes that I've peeled and chopped. I meant to cook in that minced garlic with the beef, but I forgot, so I just dumped it in on top, and that was fine. I also added in 2 carrots that I've diced up, as well as half a small head of cabbage. And to me, this is a key ingredient, and that's what makes vegetable soup, in my opinion. It's so good. But now I'm just going to start dumping in some canned vegetables. You can do frozen, but I personally much prefer it with the canned kind. So I'm just going to do a can of peas, a can of green beans, and a can of corn. Of course, I've drained all of them. And, you know, just add any vegetable in here that you like, and just leave out what you don't like. But this is also another key ingredient. I use this full 64-ounce container of V8 tomato juice. It has so much flavor, and it makes it so good. Like, if you have never tried it in your vegetable soup, give it a try at least once. It's like a game changer, and I don't think you'll go back to using anything else. This is how I've been doing it for years, also how my dad does it. But I'm just going to season everything up with the same seasonings I use for the ground beef. So again, salt, pepper, onion, and garlic powder. And don't be afraid to like season it heavily. This is a big pot of soup, so I go pretty heavy handed. So after I got that stirred, I added the lid, and this is one of those recipes that is perfect for when you're going to be gone all day. So I did set it on low, and I set it for 8 hours. This was on a weekend, and me and Josh were out and about. I came back, and this soup was not done. Like, the cabbage was still hard. So luckily, this Crockpot does have a boil function on it, so I did set it to that. But we had somewhere we had to be that night. We had to go to a bonfire, so I had to let this cool down and sit it in the fridge, and I had to come back to it the next day and boil the life out of it before it got done. So that is why it was so thick. This was honestly my first time making it in the crock pot. I've always just done it on the stove, so not a good first experience, but I honestly think it was the crock pot. So my question is, has that ever happened to any of y'all with vegetable soup? I will say it was definitely worth the wait though. It was absolutely delicious. Every now and then, I get a few requests to try out Indian food, so I finally listened and I made this butter chicken. I have never in my life had Indian food, so I had no clue what to expect, but I'm just going to go ahead and say that we really, really enjoyed this. Like, I was impressed, and I do think this was like a lighter version. From what I've read, it calls for less butter, so I can only imagine how good like a regular order of this would be. But here's how I did it. So I started by melting down just a little bit of coconut oil, which is something I've never cooked with before. And I'm going to add in some of this squeezed ginger, which is also something I don't use often. You could do fresh ginger or even like the ground ginger, just whatever you have. And also some minced garlic. So the recipe did say to cook in like a whole onion with that coconut oil, but if you're new here, I despise onions, so I left that part out. I know it's a key ingredient, but can't do it. But I'm going to toast up some seasoning. So I'm doing some curry powder, some garam masala. I'm sure I'm butchering how to say that, but yeah, those two spices were new to me. Also some chili powder and some sea salt. So I did go ahead and measure those out. And I did add in some onion powder since I didn't use the actual onion. But as always, if I follow a recipe, I always leave a link to it down below in my description box. That way you can get the exact measurements. So after I got that added, I'm going to add in this whole can of some no salt added tomato paste. And I'm just going to fold all of those seasonings into the tomato paste until it forms like a ball. Anytime that I like cook tomato paste prior to a recipe, it always turns out so good, I've noticed. So I'm just going to dump that in on top of 2 boneless, skinless chicken breasts. I'm just spreading that out the best that I can. And I don't think this is a common ingredient in this dish. Maybe I'm wrong, but it did call for a small head of cauliflower. And I will say that was a really great way to sneak in some veggies because we honestly couldn't even tell that it was there. It kind of just blended in with the chicken and tasted like the seasoning. So I did add in just a normal size can of tomato sauce, and then it called for 2 tablespoons of butter, and I just cut that into really thin pieces and just spread it all out on top of it. So I added my lid, and I'm going to cook mine on high for 2 hours, and that had the chicken like perfectly cooked. So I'm just going to remove that chicken from like everything else and let that chill out on a cutting board, and I'll let it sit there for a good like 15 minutes before I cut into it. But I'm just going to stir everything else together really good, and I'm going to let that cook on high for 30 minutes without the chicken. That way the cauliflower can be like perfectly tender. So at this point, I just turned off my crock pot and I added in the diced chicken, and I'm just stirring everything to coat. So now I'm going to go ahead and add in the 2 final ingredients. So that's a half a cup of half and half and just one of these small containers of some plain Greek yogurt. So that's really going to like change up the color, and as you can imagine, it makes it so like nice and creamy. This had my house smelling amazing, and of course I served it over some rice and topped it with some cilantro. I know that it's typically served with like naan bread, but I didn't know where to get some good quality bread around here, so I'm kind of kicking myself for not making it homemade, but I definitely will give that a try next time. But yeah, this made a ton, so I actually ended up freezing the leftovers. Okay, so I may have saved the best for last. This is hands down a new family favorite, and it's called smothered pork chops and potatoes. So it's basically a pork chop in this like creamy, flavorful, cheesy sauce with scalloped potatoes on the side is the best way I can describe it. So here's what you're going to need. You're going to want to grab you a pack of thick cut pork chops. You could do bone in if you want it to for even more flavor, but my husband prefers boneless, so that's just what I went with. But you're going to want to add that to a hot skillet with a little bit of olive oil added to it, and you're just going to want to sear that for a couple of minutes on each side. And I am seasoning both sides with some Lawry's garlic salt as well as some pepper. So you're not looking to cook this all the way through. Like I said, you're just trying to get that nice golden brown crust for extra flavor and for presentation. So once you do that, you're going to want to set that to the side, and then you're going to want to get enough potatoes to feed your family. So I have some russets that I've washed, and I'm just going to leave the skins on it. I have sprayed my crock pot with some nonstick cooking spray, and I just took those potatoes and I sliced those as thinly as I could. So I am going to season these up the same way I did the pork chop. So just some garlic salt and some pepper, and I'm just going in with my hands to get everything like really coated and seasoned, and you know, kind of breaking in between the ones that were stuck together to get those seasoned too. So now we're going to make the sauce, which is 1 can of this cream of chicken with herbs soup. This was my first time buying this particular one. I've always just got the plain cream of chicken, and oh my goodness, so good. And the recipe called for a combination of milk and heavy cream, but I just had half and half on hand, so I just used all half and half. So it was like 1 1/4 cup of that. And then I'm just going to add in a good amount of minced garlic, and that's it for the sauce. So I'm going to take half of that and pour it over top of the potatoes, followed by about a cup of some shredded sharp cheddar cheese. Now I can go in and add those pork chops, and I'm going to add all of the juice that accumulated on that plate. I'm not going to waste flavor. And then I can just pour that remainder of the sauce over, as well as the rest of that bag of cheese. So 2 cups total, which just lets you know off the bat that it's going to be a good recipe. But I'm just going to cover that up, and I'm going to cook it on low for 4 hours. In my experience with this cut of meat, if I let it go any longer than the 4 hours, even with a thick cut pork chop, it just tends to dry it out. So this worked out perfectly, and I'm just going to serve it with some steamed broccoli, and I'm going to pour plenty of that cheese sauce over it, which made it amazing. And if you've been with me, you already know what's coming next. Lots and lots of black pepper, and also some freeze-dried chives, or you could do green onions. But yeah, this recipe really impressed me, but I will say that some of the potatoes, not all of them, were just a little bit undercooked. So what I would do next time is I would take out the pork chops after the 4 hours, tint them with some tinfoil, and I would probably crank that crock pot up to high for like 20 to 30 minutes just to get those potatoes the way that we really like them. And if it wasn't for that, the potatoes being just a little bit underdone, it would really be up there on my list of like favorite crock pot recipes. So couldn't end this without cutting into the pork chop for you to show that there's no pink and that it's not dry. But if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found at least one thing that you would like to try out, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye guys.